Okay, we are on Gimel and Aleph. Yesterday, well, we were middle of the Gemara, 3a. In the art scroll, it should be 3a, 3a2. The Gemara's issue was we have a statement that was said by Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak that the law is a sukkah, the minimum size of a sukkah is that it has to be able to contain the majority of your body, your head, and the table, small little table, which we say the size of that is 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim. The tefach is anywhere from around, between 3 and 4 inches, the tefach. So it's around, if you want to be on the higher end, so to speak, if you'll say it's 4 inches, so it's about 28 inches by 28 inches would be the minimum size, with a height of 40 inches would be the minimum height of a sukkah and the area of a sukkah. Again, 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim. Good morning, Mr. Ajmi. 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim on the inside, and 10 tvachim on the height of the sukkah. Now, that seemed to be going in agreement with Beis Shammai's opinion. That Beis Shammai, we have a Mishnah later on in the Masechta, that Beis Shammai says that if somebody's head and the majority of his body were in the sukkah, but his table was outside the sukkah. So the question is that, so we had an opinion that says, Beis Shammai says you did not fulfill your obligation of sukkah if your table is outside the sukkah. And the reason is because he's concerned the table which contains your food is outside the sukkah. What might happen, Mr. Haber? He might come in and go after the table, stick his head outside the sukkah. And because he might stick his head outside the sukkah, so therefore the Chachamim said that it's not you do not fulfill your mitzvah of sukkah. That's the opinion of Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel says, listen, if you're in the sukkah, if you have your head and most of your body in the sukkah, that would be around 6 tvachim by 6 tvachim, you're good. You will be yotzei the mitzvah. No, it could be he would say it's not ideal. Maybe you should not have done it, but he would agree that at the end he won't say you do fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah. He says that's fine. It's called the kosher sukkah, even though you didn't have enough room for your table, and your table was outside the sukkah. Beis Hillel does not say that will invalidate your eating in the sukkah. It's still considered a kosher sukkah, even if it does not contain your table. He's not making that decree, that concern, that gzeira, that maybe you're going to go ahead and go after your table, and as a result of that, it's not considered a sukkah. It's still considered a sukkah. So that's the argument by Shammai Beis Hillel. A sukkah that does not have enough room for your table, is that a kosher sukkah or not? And the Gemara said that Rabbi Shmuel bar Yitzchak says the halacha, the law is it has to be large enough to contain a table and your head and the majority of your body. That's what he said. Like Beis Shammai, and one of the Rishonim point out this is one of the 6 places, only 6 places that the law follows Beis Shammai over Beis Hillel. This is one of the 6 exceptions to the rule. So then the Gemara questioned this ruling by saying that how do you know? The Gemara wants to say, how do you know Beis Hillel is arguing on the minimum size of a sukkah? Maybe Beis Hillel holds, like Beis Shammai, that the minimum size of the sukkah has to be that it should be able to contain your head, the majority of your body, and your table. But the argument Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is not in a small sukkah. If that, maybe everybody agrees, the Gemara wants to suggest that you need that, everybody agrees to the minimum size of a sukkah. Maybe the argument is when you met the minimum size of a sukkah, there's no issue on the minimum. Let's say it's a large sukkah. Maybe they're arguing when you have a large sukkah and the table is outside the sukkah. Maybe that's where Beis Hillel is lenient. But maybe Beis Hillel will not say that you could have a sukkah that doesn't even have the ability to contain a table. Maybe he would admit and say that type of sukkah would be invalid. That was the Gemara's question that the Gemara said yes yesterday. How do you know that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are arguing in a case of the minimum size of a sukkah as well? Maybe their argument is only about a large sukkah. There's no argument on what's the minimum size of the sukkah, but the argument is that even when you met the minimum size of the sukkah, but if the table is outside of the sukkah, that's where they're disputing. That was the question of the Gemara. That was when the Gemara said, Mimai, how do you know Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel arguing in sukkah katana? Maybe they're arguing one Adam in a large sukkah. So the Gemara said, so the Gemara said the following. Ubesukkah katana, we'll go back to the point, Ubesukkah katana lo pligi, right? And what was his basis for his question? Let's look at the language. Mimai de Beis Shammai. So maybe we'll go to that point. Mimai de Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel besukkah. That will be in the art scroll. It should be 3A. Where's it? 3A1. Yeah, 3A1, the last line of 3A1 in the art scroll. Maskef Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak asked the question. Now we're turning the page. Mimai de Beis Shammai. How do we know that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, besukkah katana pligi, they're arguing about the minimum size of a sukkah? Dilma, perhaps, besukkah gadola pligi. Maybe they're arguing on a large sukkah. You're sitting by the edge of the sukkah, by the doorway of the sukkah, and your table is outside the sukkah in the house. Maybe that's the argument. The Beis Shammai, Savri Beis Shammai hold, because we're afraid, we make a decree, we have to protect this situation, because maybe if the table is outside the sukkah, in the house, maybe you're going to lean your head outside the sukkah, and therefore you're going to eat outside the sukkah. Beis Hillel savri lo gazrina, and Beis Hillel say that we don't have to make a gzeira, and no need for making a decree that you're going to go ahead and go outside the sukkah. Maybe that's where they're arguing, but maybe Beis Hillel would agree on the minimum size of the sukkah. Maybe they're not arguing on the minimum size of the sukkah, and the dekanami. And the language of the Mishnah seems to lend itself to this point, because it says, Misha haya rosha v'rubo v'sukkah v'shulchana b'soch habayis. The case of the Mishnah later on says, if somebody's head and the majority of his body was in the sukkah, but his table was in the house, Beis Shammai says that's poslim, it's invalid, no good. Beis Hillel says mashirin, Beis Hillel says it is good. Now, if the case that they're arguing is on the minimum size of a sukkah, so why does the Mishnah later on talk about if the guy was like this and the table was like this? The Mishnah should have just said, and more clear, should have said, if the sukkah is able to, it should focus on the sukkah. If the sukkah could contain the table and the person, then then it's a kosher sukkah. If it can't contain it, it's not a kosher sukkah. Why does it emphasize if he was in a certain place and his table was somewhere else? It should have just said, the Mishnah should have just spoke about, can the sukkah contain the body and the table or not? But the fact that the Mishnah doesn't focus on the sukkah, it focuses on, doesn't say on the dimensions of the sukkah, it focuses on where he is, where the table is, sounds like that the issue over there is, you could be talking about a large sukkah, but the only issue is, the problem is the table is outside the sukkah. So that's what the Gemara says. So now, the Gemara shoots back. What you want to suggest now is that they're not arguing in the minimum size of a sukkah. You want to say they're arguing only on, if you have a morning time, you have a large sukkah, but the problem is the table, by the way, is inside the house. Uva sukkah katani lo pligi? They're not arguing on the minimum size of the sukkah. Mahatanya, we learned in a Braita, Marzeket rosho v'rubo v'shulchano. If a sukkah is able to contain the head, is most of his body, in the table, kashera. That is a what? Kosher sukkah. Rebbe Omer, Rebbe says, actually, arba amot al arba amot. Rebbe says you need to have a sukkah that's 4 amot by 4 amot, which is like 7 feet by 7 feet.
Doesn't really matter if it mentions table, as long as it's considered a table, it could be a mini table.
Right. And he's saying the second opinion is saying, as long as you need a much larger minimum size. You need 7 feet by 7 feet, not 28 inches of the area of the sukkah, which is something that you would appreciate more, Mr. Patesh. You have a little more space in the sukkah, 7 feet by 7 feet instead of 28 inches by 28 inches, right? V'tanya idach, well, we have a third opinion, Rebbe Omer, kol sukkah, and we have another brisa. Rebbe Omer, Rebbe says, kol sukkah she'ein bo arba amot, any sukkah that does not have an area of 4 amot by 4 amot, if it's not a minimum of 7 feet by 7 feet, pesula, it's not kosher. The Chachamim omrim, and the Chachamim say, afilu eino marzeket ela rosho v'rubo, even if it only contains his head and the majority of his body. It does not even contain a table. It's not able to contain a table, it's kosher. The ilu shulchano, but regarding the table, lok tani, it didn't say over here that it has to be able to contain a table. So we see over here that this Mishnah or this Braita is clearly on record, that there's somebody that goes on record that says that it does not need to contain a table. So the Gemara says, Kashan Hadadi. So we have a contradiction in the two learning, in the two teaching, two Braitos. Because we have one Braita that says that it has to contain the table as well, in one area. And we have another Braita that says it does not need to contain the table. We have two. So how do you explain the two Braitot? You have to say the two different opinions. One opinion, Elam Shmamina, Ha Beishamai, Ha Beitil. One is Beis Shammai and one is Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai is the opinion that says it has to contain the size of the table, and Beis Hillel says you don't even need to contain the size of the table for it to be a kosher sukkah. So that's what the Gemara wants to say and to prove the point. Amar Mazutra. Mazutra says, I want to tell you, Matnitin Namideka. The language of the Mishnah also indicates this idea that we're talking about a size of a sukkah. Midiktani, Beis Shammai poslim uBeis Hillel mashirim. It says, Beis Shammai says it's pasul. Pasul, when you say something is pasul, that means it's invalid. Like you say, an etrog, is this kosher or pasul? So when you talk about the pasul, or you talk about kosher, is on the item. It's not on the person. You don't say that, if you sat in the sukkah, you were kosher. You were sat in the sukkah, or that sitting in the sukkah was a pasul. You would say you're not yotzei. So the fact that the Mishnah uses the language of kosher or pasul, is this a kosher sukkah? Seems like it's going on the sukkah. Therefore, it's talking about the size of a sukkah. If the whole argument is only about a case when the table is outside the sukkah, and there's no argument on the size of a sukkah, and everyone agrees, if everybody would agree that the minimum size of a sukkah has to also contain a table, Beis Shammai omrim lo yotza, uBeit Hillel omrim yotza. The language of the Mishnah should have said whether you fulfill your obligation of sitting in such a sukkah when your table is outside the sukkah, or you don't fulfill your obligation. You would focus on the person. Is the person fulfill your obligation? You wouldn't emphasize the sukkah. You wouldn't talk about whether the sukkah is invalid or the sukkah is not invalid. It's about your eating. When you're eating in a circumstance, when you create a circumstance that you have a large sukkah and your table is outside the sukkah, So the question is, did I fulfill my obligation by eating in the sukkah when my table was out, or I did not fulfill my obligation? That should have been the language, not that the language was invalid or kosher. It's about you, whether you fulfill your obligation. You wouldn't. The language of invalid or not invalid, pasul, is on the item. It's focusing on the item. Like the etrog is pasul. Etrog is invalid. So it sounds like we're focusing on the sukkah. It could have it could be synonyms, similar at bottom line, but one is referring to. Good morning, Nathan. Good morning, Mark. Good morning, Nisim. Look at, we got a roll. We're on a roll over here. 3 people walk in at the same time. So now we have Jake. Welcome, Jake. So we're on a roll over here. Yeah, we got the minyan already, everybody. So that's why the Gemara is saying, you're right, Ariel. At the end of the day, both cases it wouldn't be good. But the question is, what is the language? How do you refer to something? When somebody is sitting, if you have a sukkah that's kosher, and you went ahead and you did something in the way you were acting, because you had your table outside the sukkah, right? We're discussing a situation when the table is outside the sukkah, the table's in the house, and you're in the sukkah. So now, and you ate in the sukkah, but the table was outside. So now, how do you? What's the right terminology that you would use? The right wording you would say is the sukkah, and you didn't fulfill your obligation. You would not use the language. You would not say pasul. It's not. It's pasul. The pasul. The word pasul refers to the item. Right, building the sukkah is more the preparation for the mitzvah. If you go ahead and you build the sukkah and you don't sit in the sukkah, you didn't. I mean, you didn't get your mitzvah. You did something great. You build the sukkah. It's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah. Right, I understand, but I don't. I don't listen, Mark. Right. You get a mitzvah. You understand, but let's say if I don't build the sukkah, let's say if someone else builds the sukkah. Right? And I never built a sukkah, right? I did not violate my obligation of sukkah, right? It's not like, if I didn't cut the etrog, meaning there's a mitzvah. Yes, you do. You get a mitzvah every time you prepare. You prepare for the mitzvah. You make it ready. You make it able to do the mitzvah. But technically, that's not the mitzvah of sukkah. Is to dwell in a sukkah. I mean, you get credit for doing something great. You created a situation. You get a mitzvah every time you go ahead and there's a mitzvah there's a mitzvah to build a Beit HaMikdash. There is such a mitzvah. That's one of the 613 mitzvahs to build the Beit HaMikdash. Is there a mitzvah? I mean, you get a mitzvah every time you go ahead. If you want, we can look at the Shulchan Aruch. We'll take out the Shulchan Aruch to address this question. The question is regarding mitzvah of building a sukkah. I mean, how do you, there's a, right, so my question, here, I'm saying it's a different type. Everyone's not obligated to build a sukkah. Like, everyone's obligated to, let's say, to sit in the sukkah, right? So let's look at So let me. I'll read you the language of the Mishnah Berurah, the Chafetz Chaim. Maybe we're both right in a certain sense. No. I don't, Mark. I don't mind. I'm happy to have everybody's input over here. The Shulchan Aruch says when you make a sukkah, you don't say a bracha on the making of the sukkah. You don't say a bracha sheki the shana mitzvotav v'tzivanu to make a sukkah. You don't say when you sit in the sukkah. Good morning, Mr. Silverman. When you sit in the sukkah, then you have a bracha. What do you do when you sit in the sukkah? You say bracha sheki the shana mitzvotav v'tzivanu leishev b'sukkah. You commanded us to sit in the sukkah. So why don't I say a bracha to build the sukkah? We don't say that bracha. So the Shulchan says we don't say that bracha. But why not? Because he says the building of the sukkah is not the completion of the mitzvah. Because you need to sit in the sukkah. So you have done maybe we could say the mitzvah has started in a certain sense. It's the beginning of the mitzvah. The way he termed, okay, but it's not. You did not complete the job. Is not complete. You know what I'm saying? Now let's write and let's look at how the Aruch HaShulchan explains that. Aruch HaShulchan. Let's see the language of Aruch HaShulchan. He says. The way he learns, you see the first, you see he says, listen to this. See, in the beginning, he says, he opens up with the idea that he opens up, even though he opens up in the beginning, there's a mitzvah to make a sukkah. That's how he opens up the siman. There's a mitzvah to make a sukkah. But then he concludes, then at one point he says, it's not the mitzvah is not complete because the Gemar mitzvah, the completion of the mitzvah is by sitting in the sukkah. Therefore, that's when you say the bracha. Okay. So it's something good to look into. Every adult does not have to build a sukkah. But exactly. So now, but it's still definitely what? Right, but definitely when you prepare something for a mitzvah, it's definitely you did a mitzvah. It's a different type of mitzvah. So most probably we'll identify it like that. I still recommend everybody to build a sukkah. We say right after Yom Kippur, what do we say? What does Allah say? What do you do right after Yom Kippur? You go start building a sukkah. You go from mitzvah, some people build it before, but some people build it right afterwards. Some people before because they want to get that extra merit before Yom Kippur. But other people build it right afterwards and say, you say, look, I'm going from mitzvah to mitzvah. What? Yeah, exactly. That's the many Ashkenazim do that. You go from mitzvah to mitzvah. The other thing is, okay, different people do different things. It's also brought down. You know what? Now we're in the matzah season, everybody, right? So now, baking matzah. You're preparing the mitzvah. Do you have a mitzvah to bake the matzah? I was saying, but you get a mitzvah. I'll call it a credit. I'll give you a mitzvah. You'll get mitzvah, and it's a special thing to go bake matzah. But it's a different level. It's the beginning of the process. And by the way, it's a beautiful thing, and I recommend anybody who has the opportunity, has the time to go bake matzah. It's brought down in the Svarim that it's a great kapara, it's a great atonement for sins. Certain sins people do sins. It's a great atonement. You're sweating for matzah. The sweat, the toil that you put into a mitzvah is a very big thing. So the Gemara continues. The Gemara says, Ella kasha. We have a question. What's the question? We have two different languages in the Mishnah that are taking us two different directions. We have the Mishnah mentioning the word pasul or kosher. So, by the way, just to give you just a little to Ariel to back Ariel a little bit. The Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, by the way, says that when you make a sukkah for yourself, he says you say the bracha asher kiddushanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot sukkah. How do you like that? We know we don't say a bracha when we make a sukkah, right? But the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, brings an opinion that says that when you make a sukkah, you actually will say a bracha on the building of the what? Of the sukkah. And if you now, and he says, okay, but that's just something interesting to note. So we still need to look more into this level of this mitzvah of building a sukkah. At least the Jerusalem Talmud, they don't say any bracha when they bake the matzah. There's no bracha when making the matzah. Okay, but again, our custom, we don't make a bracha when we build the sukkah either. But that was the Yerushalmi. Okay, Ela kasha. So we have a question. The Gemara says we have the Mishnah's language is indicating two items. On the one hand, it's indicating that the issue here is the sukkah, because the Mishnah says the language invalid or valid, kosher or pasul. Invalid or not, the word pasul goes on the item, on the sukkah. So it sounds like the issue is the size of the sukkah. And then the Mishnah also talks about the person. He is somewhere, the table is somewhere else. So that seems to be, the issue is it's not the size of the sukkah, it's that the fact that the table is outside the sukkah is the problem. So the Gemara says, you know what? Really, both are true. And the Mishnah really is talking about both cases. And we have something in the text that we had in front of us was missing some of the words. La'olam, the Gemara says, bitarti pligi. They're arguing in both cases, the Gemara says. Sukkah katana and pligi b'sukkah gedola. They're arguing by sukkah, a small sukkah, and they're arguing by what? By a large sukkah. Now we're on the bottom, by the way, of 3A2. La'olam bitarti pligi. They're arguing in both cases. V'chasuri mechsera v'chachiktani. You need to understand the Mishnah the following way, as if we read the following. Mi shehaya rosho v'rubo b'sukkah. Case number one, someone whose head and the majority of his body was in the sukkah. V'shulchano b'toch habayit, but his table was inside the house. So this is not talking about the size of the sukkah. The sukkah could be a big, large sukkah. But what's the problem? The problem is that the table is inside the house. That's the problem. By the way, la halacha in Shulchan Aruch it says, if you have a massive sukkah and you sit by the doorway of the sukkah right inside, you're inside, but the table where the food is outside the sukkah, it's no good. The halacha says, even though, what do you mean, Rabbi, I have a beautiful large sukkah, I have all the dimensions of the sukkah, but it's a kosher sukkah, but you didn't feel obligation, because why? The table was outside the sukkah, and you should know that would, what'd you say? Why would someone do that? You know, because let's say the table is even in the house, right? And let's say the table is in the house. Nathan, the case would be, let's say you have your table inside your house. You don't want to move your table inside that. You have all your food set up inside the house, and you're eating inside the sukkah. You know, some people have like everything's adjacent, like back to the house. So that's not kosher. There's an interesting question in the halacha. Who said it's not kosher? The chachamim. The rabbi said it's not kosher because maybe you're going to come to stick your head inside the house where the food is. Right, but here we're talking about the case when you could fulfill. You could. Are both laws connected? That's that your question? Right. So it's very good. So let's explain what Mr. Ad. Let's explain what Mr. Admi is asking. A sukkah that cannot contain a table. We'll see if this is what you're talking. A sukkah that's small enough that it can't contain a table. We say that the table has to be outside the sukkah. That sukkah is no good. Why is it no good? Is it the same reason that if you have a large sukkah and the table is outside the house because you might come to eat outside that sukkah? Are they working with the same reasoning that if it's too small and the table is outside, you might come outside? And if it's large and the table's outside, you might come outside, or they're totally two different reasons. Maybe a small sukkah, the problem is not because you might come to leave the sukkah. That might be an additional problem. But the problem might be when the sukkah is so small, it's not even a kosher sukkah. When a sukkah is very large and the table's outside the sukkah is kosher. The only problem is the table's outside the sukkah, and you might come to eat outside the sukkah. But when a sukkah is so small that it can't even contain a table, so there's two possibilities. Either possibility number one is because you might come to come outside the sukkah. Or possibly number two is that that the sukkah, there's something inherently wrong with the sukkah itself. Meaning to say, the concern that you might come to eat outside the sukkah is a rabbinic concern. I might come to stick my head outside the sukkah. But on a biblical level, I'm in a kosher sukkah, and I have a large sukkah, and I might stick my head outside. But if the sukkah does not contain my table, it might not even be a sukkah. It might even be biblically not even fulfill the mitzvah. That would be the difference, how you look at, how do you interpret the issue. If you have a sukkah that's 6 tvachim by 6 tvachim, not enough size to contain the table, and it's not good, is it rabbinically not good, or it's biblically not good? That will be the difference. But what's interesting is, some understand that even a large sukkah, if the table is outside the sukkah, we said it's no good. Correct, Nathan? If you have a large sukkah, but you're sitting inside, but your table is outside the sukkah and it's in the house, it's not good. Which we said is a rabbinic law. Good morning. It's the rabbinic, beautiful. It's the rabbinic law that the sukkah is not good, right? Ariel, right? It's a rabbinic law, it's not good. Do the rabbis, when the rabbis say that it's not good if you have your table inside the house, does that already create that you're not even fill the mitzvah on a Torah level? Or it's on a rabbinic level, you don't get the credit, but on a Torah level, you get the credit. This is a very interesting discussion. Did the rabbi, see, when the Torah says, follow the rabbis, how the rabbis tell you to do certain things. So the rabbis in this type of situation, would the rabbis say, if you sit in this type of sukkah, you don't even get credit on a Torah level? Because we said that this is how you're supposed to perform the mitzvah. And if you're not doing the mitzvah this way, you're not even getting credit for the way the Torah said you're supposed to do it. Or is it just on a rabbinic level you don't get credit, but on a Torah level, technically you did the mitzvah when you had a large sukkah and the table was inside the house? So that's the discussion in the commentators. When you go ahead and you sit in a sukkah and it's very large, but the table's inside the house, you don't get credit. You would have to do it again. Is that you didn't get credit on a rabbinic level only, or is it that you even lost out on a Torah level by not following the way the rabbis say how you're supposed to perform the mitzvah?
It's rabbinic.
That's how some would understand it, but there are those that understand it that actually once the Chachamim tell you how you have to do that mitzvah, you don't, because there is a language that says, that they went to a certain sukkah, and Tosfos quotes the case, and they found somebody that was sitting in a sukkah, his head and most of his body was in the sukkah, but his table was inside the house. And what did they tell him? The rabbis from Beis Shammai said, this is how you conducted yourself your whole life. You never fulfilled the mitzvah of sukkah your whole life. So what does that mean? According to Beis Shammai, who says if the table's outside the house, even though it's a large sukkah. So what does it mean? Does it mean you didn't?
We don't hold that.
Rabbinic level, or you didn't even fill the mitzvah on a Torah level? So that's a discussion how to understand that. Yes, Mr. Safdie. Yes, ladies. That's a good question, Mr. Safdie is asking, because the way people do it today, if he says if they set up the table inside the house and they're eating it and everyone's sitting, you're sitting in the sukkah, but the table is outside the house. If we'll read the.
It's not a table.
But that's where the food is. That's his question. The food is
the bread, Rabbi, not the food, not roast, not chicken. It's lechem, and we're gonna hold like Hillel that you have to have the kazayit of bread in the sukkah. It doesn't have to have a shulchan.
Again, but we said the Shulchan Aruch. Let's read the case of the Shulchan Aruch. I want to read the Shulchan Aruch to everybody, and then we have to address, and then we have to think about Mr. Safdie's case. The Shulchan Aruch is in Siman 634, Tuf Reish Lamed Dalet. It says like this. Here is the case of the Shulchan Aruch. somebody's head and the majority of the body was in the sukkah, and his table was outside the sukkah. That's the case. And he ate. It says if he did not eat in the sukkah, even if it's a large sukkah, maybe he's going to go after his table.
But he didn't
Now-
eat. You said because he didn't eat.
Mr. Silverman, Mr. Safdie is saying you ate in the sukkah. What's the case? If you ate in the sukkah, right, and you ate, even though you ate in the sukkah, but if the table is outside the sukkah, right, that's what it's not. The Mr. Safdie's case isn't. He did that case. His case is the table's in the house. Where is the table? This the table. Oh, so you say, because he has the table, you have the table in the sukkah. So now, very good. So now,
Yeah, I'm a Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi.
No problem.
right.
Where you eat rather than where you get the food. Say you might come to eat while you.
Well, wait, right. Is that a concern? Is that a concern by the fact that, right, while the food is outside? Again, but the fact that you have your table in the sukkah, and that's where you're eating, so maybe I presume that if your table is inside the house and you have no table inside the sukkah, so you might come to eat that, you'll eat at that table. But if you have your own table in the sukkah, but then you should be good because you're going to eat it by your table. That's why you should be good. But you would be correct in a situation if, let's say, they took the tables out of the sukkah. Let's say it was raining.
Still good.
It was raining, and therefore they took all the tables. Let's say they brought all the tables inside to dry up, and then now all the food is inside the house, and you're in the sukkah, and you bring the table back, and you want to eat it. And you're in a big rush. You don't have time to take out the table, and you want to sit. You'll sit in the sukkah, but all the food is in the house. All the tables are in the house. That could be a big problem. That case should be because you might come if all the food and the tables outside the sukkah, you just have chairs in the sukkah, which is very common after a big rain. Sometimes a person, let's say it's Chalamoid, and it's a big rain, and now you want to go to work, and you want to have your breakfast, and you don't want to use the time to set up a table, and you're sitting on chairs in the sukkah. That might be a problem. That might be a big problem.
Then it would say, then the halakha would be that you have to have a shulchan in the sukkah, like a skach. It doesn't say that you have to have a shulchan
but that's what the
in the
Shulchan
sukkah
Aruch,
like a
very
skach.
good. But that's what the Shulchan Aruch says. If you were in the sukkah and your table was outside the sukkah, so that seems to be saying you must have your table in the sukkah. You have to have your table where you're eating from in the sukkah, or else you might come to eat outside the sukkah.
I'm not arguing on Maran, but I'm telling you the halakha is. I'm not arguing on Beit Yosef, but I believe that the halakha is that it has nothing to do with a shulchan. It has to do with eating kazai of a lechem in the sukkah. Doesn't talk about a shulchan. Doesn't talk about nerot.
Okay, but we have this halacha black and white.
Yes,
that
you
says
follow the rabbi.
But this here we have a big halachic question that we're gonna
Derabanan versus
talk about.
deraita.
How do we, in such a what? I'm reading the Shulchan Aruch now.
I have it right here, Rabbi.
Very good. Now you also have a case. Let's say you go to a pizza shop and they have a sukkah, and let's say for whatever reason there's no table set up, whatever the case was, and now you want to go eat your pizza in the sukkah, and there's no table here. So it sounds like it might be a big problem. But
it's not. You can sit on a chair. You can sit on a chair under the sky.
I'm sitting on a chair, but still my table. It's cool. The question is when majority of my body is in the sukkah, I'm also sitting on that couch that they used to sit on couches. And even though I'm sitting on a couch, majority of my body is in the sukkah, but we're still worried about if the table is outside. So we have to look more into this question. So we're going to end with this question. We're going to start. Everyone's going to have a beautiful davening today. So let's think about this a little bit more. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Nathan, what do you want to say? Thanks. You hear what Nathan says? The Shulchan Aruch is biased. The Shulchan, the table, the set table, biased. You have to have the table.
Set table.
On the screen.
Nathan,
cute. Recorded, Nathan.
A cute one.
Thank you.
Take care, Rabbi. Bye-bye.
It's imperative to have the table but the question is in the sukkah. That's what it comes to. We have a different appreciation of a table now. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Second, we're gonna.